know the name Doug Poppa?
Yes, I do. God bless Doug Poppa, an honest cop.
I was elated, of course, but then as he testified, I was somewhat concerned for him, because I knew that they were probably going to crucify that man.
The top cop who put his badge on the line for justice.
Sometimes the truth has a price. That may be the lesson of a Virginia police officer who says, in trying to do the right thing, he ended up paying for it. Of one man who confronted truth and consequences.
From Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Doug Poppa, Truth and Consequences podcast.
This one was basically an assassination execution, of two very young people.
Metro Homicide Lieutenant Dan McGrath.
There were several items that contained DNA evidence. The problem is these people had a lot of friends, a lot of associates, a lot of people that hung out at the apartment complex with them. So sorting through all the details of what was relevant and what's not has been a challenge. I mean, when I refer to DNA, I mean, there's cigarette butts everywhere and the ashtrays full of stuff. There's drink cups everywhere. So you talk about DNA being in the apartment, there's all kinds of stuff, So who knows what was supposed to be there and what wasn't supposed to be there. What was relevant and what's not. What was relevant and what's not. What was relevant and what's not. Who knows what was supposed to be there and what wasn't supposed to be there. Who knows what was supposed to be there and what wasn't supposed to be there. Who knows what was supposed to be there and what wasn't supposed to be there.
Welcome, folks. This is episode 86 for Tuesday, January 25th, 2022. If you haven't already done so, may I suggest that you view episodes 83, 84, and 85, as this episode is a follow-up to those previous episodes. Episode 83 was my exclusive interview with Alethea Kauffman, the mother of Nehemiah Kauffman, who, along with his girlfriend, Sydney Land, were both found shot in the head inside their southwest Las Vegas apartment on October 27, 2016. In episode 84, I interviewed Connie Land, the mother of Sydney Land. The 2016 Line-Kauffman double homicide is now over 5 years unsolved. At the opening of this episode, you saw excerpts of Las Vegas Metro Police homicide detective Jared Grimmett appearing on the Crime Watch Daily program that aired in April of 2018. As you heard, Detective Grimmett discussed on that program details that should have remained confidential, including DNA crime scene evidence that was found inside the double homicide crime scene. Folks, all evidence found at a crime scene is relevant, whether or not the investigating detective thinks it was supposed to be there or not. Interestingly enough, Detective Grimmett or his partner, Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch, conveniently omitted any mention on the Crime Watch Daily program that the integrity of the double homicide crime scene was compromised by a crime scene analyst and high-ranking members of the Las Vegas Metro Police Department who were inside an active crime scene, had no valid reason for being in there, and had to be asked to leave. You heard Alethea Kauffman in episode 83 discuss what she was told by the police on that, to include the fact that she was told only 10 items of evidence from a double homicide crime scene was sent to the crime lab for analysis, and another piece of evidence found outside the apartment was also never analyzed. Listen, folks, any professional investigator knows that the preliminary investigation that is conducted at a crime scene is crucial. The preservation and protection of the crime scene is paramount, as it will affect any other aspect of the criminal investigation as it progresses. In addition to the Las Vegas Metro Police destroying the integrity of the double homicide crime scene on October 27, 2016, on national television, 18 months after the unsolved murders, Detectives Grimmett and Dorsch willingly and openly discussed evidence found at the scene, who was a suspect, and released confidential police crime scene photographs of the interior of the apartment. And if it could not get any worse, the police released to the show a crime scene photograph of Sydney Land's body and the blood-soaked room that her body was found in. Because of that incompetent and negligent act, everyone who watched that show back in April of 2018 now knew what the inside of the double homicide crime scene looked like, including Sydney Land's body. Just what the hell was Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, thinking when he authorized his detectives to appear on that show and further destroy the integrity of the criminal investigation into an unsolved double murder? For those of us looking from the outside in, it appears to have been an intentional act. Those crime scene photographs, to include Sidney Land's body, should never have been made public. The Las Vegas Metro Police did not even have the courtesy to advise the Land family prior to the airing of the show that Sidney Land's body and the blood-soaked room will be aired on national television. That's how the Land family found out, ladies and gentlemen, on national television. What police department does actions like this? None that I know of, except for Sheriff Lombardo's department. The police did not release any photograph of Nehemiah Kauffman's body, and I have to ask the question, then why was the releasing of the crime scene photograph of Sidney Land's body done? Was it a retaliatory tactic by the police because of Connie Land's persistent contacts with them? Very troubling. Regardless, the police blew it. They not only botched the crime scene, but the integrity of the criminal investigation as well by appearing on that show. Listen up. The largest homicide investigation ever conducted in the history of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was the October 1st, 2017 Las Vegas Massacre, the worst mass shooting in modern American history. And guess what, folks? The police in that case also compromised the integrity of the crime scene inside the gunman's Mandalay Bay Hotel suite, as I have previously reported over the years. Prior to the arrival of the crime scene analyst, Stephen Paddock's body was moved, as well as items inside the hotel suite. Folks, once an item of evidence is moved, it can never be placed back into its exact original position. It compromises the integrity of the crime scene. In addition to that, crime scene photographs of Paddock's body and the weapons inside the suite were leaked to the media by police personnel, thus compromising the integrity of the criminal investigation of the worst mass shooting to date. Sheriff Lombardo's answer to that was once again to lie to the media, and along with his then undersheriff, Kevin McMahill, orchestrate a cover-up as to which command staff officers were involved in the leaking of the Paddock crime scene photographs. More to come on that in another exclusive episode. Now, back to the Land Kauffman murders. You heard Connie Land in episode 84 describe her disgust when she found out that homicide detective Jared Grimmett's daughter once had a personal relationship with Shane Valentine, the suspect at the time in the Land Kauffman murders that her father, Detective Jared Grimmett, was investigating. For further clarity on that, here are excerpts from my June 23, 2020 interview with Connie Land. Nothing is over until the families of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kauffman get justice for their murdered children. If you think you have heard it all, folks, far from it. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa for continuing exclusive investigative stories that are not covered by the Las Vegas media. And if you can, please support my independent investigative journalism at paypal.me/Doug Poppa. Folks, I am self-funded, conduct my own research and investigations, develop my own sources of information, and produce my own podcast, so any help would be greatly appreciated. Many of you already know that I'm a former law enforcement officer with over 40 years of investigative experience, both in the public and private sectors. Thanks for listening, and now, here's Connie Land. You received a rather interesting and kind of troubling message from one of Sidney's friends. Can you tell me what happened with that?
Yeah, I got a message on Messenger from someone that said he had some information about the homicide, that he had gone to school with Sidney, and asked me to reach out to him. And so I did call him. And what he proceeded to tell me was very disturbing. He had informed me that he was very good friends with Detective Grimmett, Jared Grimmett, who's the detective on the homicide. And he had said that Detective Grimmett's daughter used to date or was involved with Shane Valentine, who is a person of interest. That's so disturbing to me that, that he's all the things that have happened in this case. And now I find out that his daughter's associated with Shane Valentine. And then he went a step further and sent me a text message between him and Detective Grimmett's son, where he said, yeah, his dad said that Shane Valentine didn't commit the murders.
Wow.
So it was concerning to me that he's talking about the homicide to his family. Who else is he talking to the homicide? Well, we know that there's an alleged communication between him and Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. And then we find that his daughter is involved. So I reached out to homicide and spoke to the sergeant, and
what's his name? What's his name?
Sergeant Fletcher. He's my point of contact now at homicide. So I sent him an email and I said, can you explain a few things to me? I have learned from a reliable source that Grimmett, and I said his daughter's name, was at some point involved with Shane Valentine.
And what is his daughter's name?
Taylor, I believe.
And what's his son's name?
Tristan Grimmett.
Okay, so this, let me make this straight here, so for people listening. So you received a message from one of Sydney's friends who's friends with Detective Jared Grimmett's son, Tristan.
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
Go on.
And so I reached out to them and I said, I'm very concerned that Shane Valentine had an association with Grimmett. So I numbered him down. I said, 1, did Jared Grimmett ever disclose in the last 3.5 years that his daughter had a relationship or he knew Shane Valentine at any point in the investigation? 2, why is Detective Grimmett talking to his family that Shane Valentine didn't commit the murders? And they referenced, somebody else involved in the homicide also, or may have been involved in the homicide. 3, is this protocol, and is this going to damage the case in any way? Now, Grimmett, I've been asking for over 3 years. I did not want Grimmett on the case. I had been told by Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson that she was getting information about the homicide from Jared Grimmett. Jared Grimmett went on national television on Crime Watch Daily and blew all the information about the DNA that it was in the apartment, which it's an open homicide investigation, and you're going to say that the DNA was a mess and you didn't know what was supposed to be there and what wasn't. You've got his daughter that's involved and, tied with him. You've got him saying that his son, that Shane Valentine didn't do it, and he's talking to his family. So I want to know how many other people Grimmett's running his mouth to about who did this murder and who didn't do the murder.
Okay, let's hang on for a second here. So I just want to get some things clear. So you sent the text messages, you sent the emails to Mike Fletcher, and then you sent those emails to me also.
And I sent it to Detective Dosh also.
Okay, one was on the 8th, and one was on the 9th, and the one on the one on the 8th says, I got over here, I just want to make sure we get this on the record. You're talking to Sergeant Michael Fletcher. You're sending him, well, not talking to him, you send him the email over Metro Homicide. He's the sergeant of Homicide Bureau. And you're telling him, were you aware Taylor Grimmett was involved with or dated Shane Valentine several years ago? And then you say, did Grimmett disclose at any time that he or his family had any personal involvement with Shane Valentine during any part of this homicide investigation? Then on the 9th, you send him another email, and you state that I recently received correspondence from a verified source where Grimmett has stated to an individual regarding who committed the murders. Grimmett stated Shane didn't do it. I would like to know, is Shane still a person of interest and or a suspect in this case? And then why is Grimmett still continuing to discuss this case and who did it to third parties? Okay, did you get a response at some time or any point with Sergeant Fletcher?
Yeah, it was about 5 weeks later.
Wow, 5 weeks later?
Yeah, and he called. Oh, I sent him several messages or emails in between that time, and I said, you didn't answer my questions. And he called, and we spoke very briefly, and he said, I spoke to Grimmett, and we do not feel that his daughter's involvement is going to be any issues with this case or the investigation.
Wow.
And I said, well, I think it is. That's a big problem for me. If a criminal defense attorney finds out that his daughter was somehow involved or he didn't disclose at any point, which clearly when Fletcher is saying, I spoke to him and we don't feel that that's a problem, clearly Grimmett didn't ever disclose the relationship or his family's involvement with Shane Valentine at the beginning of the homicide. And I would imagine that would be something that he should have done.
Absolutely.
To maintain the integrity of this case.
Absolutely. Let me say something right just from my prior experience as a criminal investigator. What Sergeant Fletcher told you, I don't know how they operate over at Las Vegas Metro Homicide, but that is a bunch of BS, okay? That criminal investigation was compromised the minute Jared Grimmett found out that Shane Valentine was a suspect, and from what we know based on my investigation, that was immediately after the homicide. Shane Valentine was a suspect in this case, and the police said that. Immediately, at that point, he was also working with Detective Mitchell Dosh. He should have went to his supervisor and said, I have a possible conflict of interest here, because there is no possible, it was a conflict of interest. He should have been removed from investigating this case. But now, from what you're telling me, it sounds like he may not even have told anybody at Metro Homicide, any of the superiors, because of what Fletcher told you. That is, that this case was compromised, Connie, from the start. The minute Jared Grimmett opened his mouth to Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, and I've reported that in many stories and then on 3 podcasts so far, and one that's coming out, it'll be out here, another one. But that homicide investigation was compromised the minute he opened his mouth to Judge Tobiasson. Judge Tobiasson had a personal involvement with Shane Valentine, both in the courtroom, and then she told me she had threatened him through his attorney, and then she went to his house and kicked in his door because Sarah had an involvement with Shane Valentine also. And those were stories. That's not a big secret. I've written stories on that. So now we have one of the homicide investigators working the homicide of your daughter and Neil Kauffman, her boyfriend, 3.5 years still unsolved as of this date. And the homicide investigator's daughter at one point had a relationship of some type that we don't know what the type of relationship was with Shane Valentine. It doesn't matter. That wasn't told to his supervisors. This case was compromised twice. And it's a major issue. That is not standard police protocol in any police department I know of. And I've spoken to homicide commanders and supervisors outside of Metro, and they said that's abhorrent. There's no way that this detective should have remained on the case or had anything to do with it. At the very least, he should have been taken off this and given another case away from this investigation. But to have him continued into this investigation to this day, as far as we know, with all that came out, with him talking to Judge Tobiasson, who, like I said, had an involvement in that case, and now we just found this information out a few months ago, it's far more than troubling. This homicide investigation needs to be taken out of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. It needs to be handled and looked at by another agency, whether that's the FBI or the Attorney General's office, because they compromised the case. Your daughter's murder investigation has been compromised. That's it in a nutshell. Go ahead, Connie. I didn't mean to get on that spiel.
No, that's okay. I have been asking since the beginning of 2017, I wanted Grimmett off this case. I didn't trust him. I had a bad feeling about him. When Melanie, Andress-Tobiasson, the judge, when I met her in May, she immediately started telling me that it was Grimmett that was providing all the information to her. Mm-hmm. And that was very concerning to me. And every single time I have gone to Internal Affairs, they had the case for less than 36 hours, and they call me back and tell me that there was no wrongdoing by Grimmett.
Well, I did a story on that last year when you told me that, and I'm telling you right now, I'd love to see that Internal Affairs investigator file, because I'm telling you, they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. No. They didn't do an Internal Affairs investigation. They're just blowing smoke on this. That's my opinion. I'd love to see the file on the major investigation. Was Jared Grimmett pulled in? Was he put on a polygraph? Did they interview Judge Tobiasson? Did they get to the bottom of this? No, they didn't do any of that because I believe they didn't do it. Go ahead, Connie.
It's just one thing after another, after another, after another. And I can't tell you how many emails requesting for Grimmett to be taken off of this case. I've spoken to the lieutenants. I've spoken to the sergeants. I've wanted him off of this case.
What did they tell you?
They're not taking him off the case because every time I talk to him, he's still on the case.
Okay.
And they work on it when they have time. And so when I asked, and so continuing on the conversation with Sergeant Fletcher, I said, well, isn't that a concern that, I said, not only is he talking to Melanie, the Judge Tobiasson, he's talking to her right out of the gate, immediately after the murders happened. And 3.5 years later, he's talking about this, and his son is saying his dad, Shane didn't do it. And I said, how can he be doing that? He said, it's not uncommon. This was his response. He said, it is not uncommon for police officers or detectives to talk about cases at home.
He told you that?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, let me tell you something right now. I don't know anything about this guy. I'm telling you right now, that is BS. That is BS. I was a cop for 16 years. I worked major investigations. I never went home and told my wife anything about a criminal investigation. I certainly never would tell her details about a double homicide investigation, or anybody for that matter. That is a bunch of nonsense. I'm telling you again, I don't know what's going on over there at Metro Police Homicide Bureau. This is not standard protocol in any police department that I know of. It's not standard procedure. It's an actual disgrace. 3.5 years later, this case is compromised. This case is compromised, was compromised from the start, the minute Jared Grimmett opened his mouth to Judge Tobiasson. On April 27, 2018, you received a text message from Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch, Jared Grimmett's partner. And I want to read this in because this is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And from other supervisors that I talked to in homicide bureaus across the country that I read this to, they said they never heard of anything like this before in their life, especially that a homicide detective would send this to the mother of a murdered girl whose murder hasn't been solved. And this is what he said. So many things happened since the murders happened that I've never seen before and I had zero control over. I won't get into them now, but they are well chronicled. Detective Grimmett and I are left to pick up the pieces and work toward a successful outcome despite all the quote-unquote things that have happened along the way. We are not going away. Did he ever tell you what all these things were that compromised this case and the things that he had no control over?
No,
okay.
He didn't.
Okay.
It was interesting. I spoke to him one time, and there were several, I think it's M13.
MS-13.
The gang.
MS-13.
Okay, right. It was MS-13. And I hadn't spoken to him in a while. And I said, hey, Detective Dosh, I hope you're doing great. Hope you're doing okay. He said, I'm really sorry I haven't responded. We've been really busy with the MS-13 murders. And I think there were 10 or 13 murders in a very, very short period of time here. And I think that it was a multi-agency effort that in taking these down, I don't know if it was the DEA, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, I don't know. There were several agencies that worked in unison in tackling this problem. And he said, it was crazy. He said, that was a walk in the park or a cakewalk compared to the stuff that I'm dealing with in this homicide.
Wow. So I remember that those murders, I believe, and this is coming off the top of my head. I don't have the articles in front of me. This was about 2 years ago, and there was about 10 bodies that were found in different locations throughout Las Vegas and the desert areas. Most of them were dismembered, and they were done by the members of the MS-13, and they did lock up the perpetrators of those murders. But he's telling you that investigating 10 murders, dismembered bodies, was
a cakewalk compared to what he's dealing with in my daughter's homicide investigation.
Did you ever ask them what the reason why these murders, your daughter and Neo's murders, are not solved? Did he ever tell you why they're not solved?
No.
Okay. Did he ever?
And I've asked.
Did he ever explain to you why the murders of 10 people who were dismembered by MS-13, was an easier investigation than the investigation of your daughter and Neo's death?
No.
Judge Tobiasson only didn't tell you, and you provided me when I met you in January of 2019, when I first made contact with you, you provided me with all the text messages between yourself and Judge Tobiasson, and I wrote multiple stories on that, and since I've not writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner anymore, I'm covering this on my podcast, Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. But what I want to bring out here is going back to Detective Dorsch. After Judge Tobiasson, when you disassociated yourself after what you did, when you knew basically she was doing a lot of stuff she shouldn't have done, you gave those text messages and communications with Judge Tobiasson, including the ones with, she mentions Detective Grimmett. You gave all those to him in what, 2017?
Yeah, it was end of October, right around October 22nd, 23rd, 2017.
Okay, so in October of 2017, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department had possession of all the emails that you gave me in reference to Judge Tobiasson for, well, that would have been at least 2-3 years at this point. So he had those. He's a member of the department, so the department had them because he's a detective for the department. Did he ever tell you what he did with those?
No, it was about 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later. He introduced me to the Criminal Intelligence Division, 2 detectives in the Criminal Intelligence Division, who would be taking over or handling the Judge Tobiasson issue. And so our communication continued there. But it's really interesting,
and who
Doug,
were those 2 detectives? What were their names?
Mark Gregory and Detective Mike Wilson.
The homicide investigation into Sydney and Neo's death was compromised the minute Jared Grimmett released confidential details and evidentiary details to Judge Tobiasson, who had a personal involvement and her daughter with the suspect in the case. And I don't know the content of their conversations. I do know that Judge Tobiasson told me on the record that he provided her with the evidence that showed that Shane Valentine, Dominique Thompson, and Frankie Zappia committed the murders. She even said they executed your daughter and Neo at 12:30 a.m. on October 26th of 2016. And she said that information came from Detective Grimmett, the homicide investigator working the case. And she also told me in emails later on, she actually mentions Grimmett, and that they have all the evidence that showed that those 3 people committed the murders.